70% of the World Economic Forum's presentations are online. So there's no point in me going for that. The point is to go and get the mood, the ethos, to meet the kind of people who attend there. And people speak more freely, they speak more openly, and that makes for something very, very interesting. The attitude of Europe these days towards the United States is that we're an ATM. And we have no right to offer any opinions on everything. We just simply have an obligation to keep sending money. The average man, the average American citizen, found representation at the WEF by a billionaire in the person of Donald Trump. That, to me, is fascinating. And it's also indicative of the fact that Trump, in spite of his billionaire status, somehow is not out of touch with the American people. He's not out of touch with what they want, and he's not out of touch with what they need. That said, I was there, I was paying attention to everything that I possibly could, and I was taking an awful lot of video. So now I'm going to give you the download. Welcome to another episode of Ideas Have Consequences with me, Larry Alex Taunton, and I'm reporting to you from Poland. I'm in Krakow. I left the World Economic Forum just yesterday in Switzerland, Davos, Switzerland, and some of you have wanted to really hear from me what was going on there, and I apologize that I've been incredibly busy that I've not had time to record a proper Ideas Have Consequences. That said, I was there, I was paying attention to everything that I possibly could, and I was taking an awful lot of video. And so now I'm going to give you the download. And honestly, it's probably best that I am doing it just a few days after the fact, because it's given me time really to process it, rather than just simply rushing to get out an article or to get out commentary, this sort of thing. I've wanted the time to really process what was taking place there, what it was all about. So I'm not, obviously, I'm in a hotel room. You'll have to forgive me. Lori's not here to keep everything looking very nice and neatly. I've kind of straightened up just a little bit, just a little bit for you. And I wish that I could do it in a sexier environment. I like to optimize the locations where I am. So if I'm in London, it's nice to have the London Eye or Parliament or something like that behind you. The problem is that it's incredibly cold outside, and there's some sort of concert that I think you'll probably hear just a little of, coming through. And it's just, unfortunately, I just couldn't find that. Now, getting on to the World Economic Forum and what took place there, it all begins with President Trump. And I really want to do a proper download here of his talk. And that's because every post-Trump address to the WEF article that I have seen, or commentary that I've seen, has been inaccurate. And that's even from those who weren't lying. I mean, so many of them were just outright lies, characterizing him as though he were a madman speaking to the WEF. I mean, he wasn't that at all. He was very measured. He was humorous. He was firm. Trump is that. He was quite firm in stating his agenda, but he was friendly. He was presidential. And he was Donald Trump. Donald Trump likes people. And in this case, he wants to be liked by the WEF, but not at the expense of his own agenda. And why I think others missed, even those who would be friendly to Trump, I feel like missed what was his central thesis, is perhaps because they didn't listen to the whole thing. And I did. I listened to it a couple of times, and maybe just went and read articles or comments about it. Much of what you've seen has suggested that his talk was primarily about Greenland. It wasn't. Much else of what has been said about his talk was that it was about NATO. It wasn't. Others have said it was about the economy. It wasn't. Still others have said that it was about Ukraine or borders. it wasn't. Donald Trump's central thesis, and this is what makes it so wonderful, why I loved his talk, it was about, and I quote, the American citizen. American citizens, that was the thesis. Everything else he had to say, that was the hub. And everything else he had to say was a spoke off of that hub. Even, whether it was a reference to NATO or Greenland or to Ukraine or the economy or borders, it all related back to American citizens. And in a place like Davos, I mean, these days we're so used to politicians being alarmingly dismissive of the people they've been elected to serve. They just don't seem to care. And we see that whether it's, Trudeau and now Carney in Canada. I mean, really extraordinary disregard for the citizens of their country, or whether it's Macron or almost anyone you care to name, Starmer. Maloney is an exception, and Donald Trump is an exception. Javier Milei of Argentina is also an exception, but they're pretty rare. And for Donald Trump to walk into the WEF like John Wayne and deliver an address where he basically says, I'm not here to save the world. I'm not here about the world. I'm not here really to do anything for the world. I'm here on behalf of American citizens. And the World Economic Forum is a billionaire boys club. There are no poor people in Davos. You simply don't see them. And they don't want them there. And they're not represented at the World Economic Forum. It's 1% of 1% of 1% who are present at the World Economic Forum. And when it comes to people speaking on stage, the average man just doesn't get representation. And so it's quite fascinating to me that the average man, the average American citizen, found representation at the WEF by a billionaire in the person of Donald Trump. That to me is fascinating. And it's also indicative of the fact that Trump, in spite of his billionaire status, somehow is not out of touch with the American people. He's not out of touch with what they want, and he's not out of touch with what they need. So it starts with Donald Trump, not because he was at the WEF the entire time. He wasn't. He spoke on day 3 of the WEF, and then he immediately left. But it's because he cast a very long shadow over the World Economic Forum. Listen to what he has to say right here when he's talking about the American citizen.
This afternoon, I want to discuss how we have achieved this economic miracle, how we intend to raise living standards for our citizens to levels never seen before, and perhaps how you too and the places where you come from can do much better by following what we're doing, because certain places in Europe are not even recognizable, frankly, anymore. They're not recognizable. And we can argue about it, but there's no argument. Friends come back from different places. I don't want to insult anybody, and say, I don't recognize it. And that's not in a positive way. That's in a very negative way. And I love Europe, and I want to see Europe go good, but it's not heading in the right direction. In recent decades, it became conventional wisdom in Washington and European capitals that the only way to grow a modern Western economy was through ever-increasing government spending, unchecked mass migration, and endless foreign imports. The consensus was that so-called dirty jobs and heavy industry should be sent elsewhere, that affordable energy should be replaced by the Green New Scam, and that countries could be propped up by importing new and entirely different populations from faraway lands. This was the path that Sleepy Joe Biden administration and many other Western governments very foolishly followed.
So did you catch that right there? He says, I'm here to talk about what we are doing on behalf of Americans, on behalf of American citizens. He was specific in that. He's excluding illegal aliens and how he intends to raise the living standards of American citizens. In a place like Davos, which, as I say, is full of all of these, WEF puppets, and where the mission statement of the World Economic Forum is a very deliberately vague improving the state of the world. How? For whom? In uncertain times, wise investors look for stability. Markets are overinflated, inflation remains a concern, and global tensions continue to rise. That's why many are turning to the safety of physical gold and silver. Alpha Omega Gold is a Christian-owned precious metals company known for honesty, transparency, and biblical stewardship principles. Their team help clients protect their investment with integrity and clear guidance, never pressure. Right now, Alpha Omega Gold is offering a free precious metals navigation guide to explain why owning gold and silver can be a smart, strategic hedge for retirement accounts and long-term security. Don't wait until economic shifts impact your future. So today, go and visit www.ao.gold/IHC or call 855-4AO-GOLD. That's 855-426-4653. Call today to learn how simple it can be to secure what matters most. You see, the World Economic Forum, as I have said 1,000 times on Ideas Have Consequences in numerous articles, is fundamentally anti-human. They're not about improving the lives of people. They're not about people at all, other than to reduce the number of them that are walking around on this planet. I mean, the carbon they want to reduce is you. That's the way they think. And the World Economic Forum slogan, improving the state of the world, reminds me of a classic Twilight Zone. Rod Serling, wrote those, like he intended them to be like Aesop's fables, and that they were to have something of a moral to each episode. And in a very famous episode of the Twilight Zone, called To Serve Man, aliens come to Earth, and Earthlings want to know, why are you here? What's your purpose in coming to our planet? What's your mission? And so a representative of the aliens submits to a polygraph test in which he says, in answer to the question, to serve man. To serve man. And this leads people to the erroneous conclusion that these aliens must be benevolent. But guess what? They discover at the very end that the book, which has an alien language on it, that the book, To Serve Man, is a cookbook. The aliens intend to eat human beings. And you see, that really is the World Economic Forum. The World Economic Forum disguises a fundamentally anti-human agenda in the language they use and in amidst a lot of other programs. And I mean, just look at their website. Just take a little time, go to the World Economic Forum website, and you can watch all these videos that are about all these things that are kind of innocuous, basket weaving in Tanzania and micro businesses in Indonesia and on. Things that seem like, oh wow, I guess these are kind of neutral things. I guess they're maybe sort of good. But see, all of that is designed to disguise what they're really about. Because you see, hidden in the agenda is the WEF is essentially a cookbook for human beings. And so for Trump to walk into a place like that and to say that he's there on behalf of the American people and not to improve the environment and not to give them a bunch of things they don't want, but to say, no, I'm here to, and he spoke, by the way, in very practical terms of how he intends and is helping American citizens. He says, look, windmills, we're getting rid of that crap. It doesn't work. Grocery prices, we're bringing them down. Manufacturing, we're bringing it back. Gasoline prices, we're bringing it down. Even when he was talking about things, again, like Ukraine, like NATO, like Greenland, all of it related back to the American citizen. How, you say? Well, in talking about Ukraine, he expressed concern for the common man in Ukraine and Europe by saying, look, he was citing the statistics of how many casualties are being suffered in Ukraine. 30,000 this month, he said, 29,000 the month before that, 31,000 the month before that. Is this what you guys want? Do you want to really annihilate your youth in a war like this? Don't you want to end it? But for our part, we're not getting involved. I'm not sending American boys over there. In talking about Ukraine, he was saying, in talking about NATO, he was saying, I want to save money for the American taxpayer. We've given, in his word, trillions to NATO. He said, for what? What do we ever get in return? And then he stated what he does want. He says, we want Greenland. Now, there's been a lot of ridiculous talk and posturing by European countries to say they're going to defend Greenland from a Trump invasion. Absolutely absurd. Trump has never threatened nor has he planned on invading Greenland. So that was all just propaganda and posturing. And if Trump had planned to invade it, I don't think the EU is going to have any chance whatsoever of defending it. But he wasn't. And his plan at the WEF became very clear. And I thought it was nuanced. I thought it was brilliant. He was saying, look, it's a chunk of ice. Watch what he says right here.
So we want a piece of ice for world protection, and they won't give it. We've never asked for anything else, and we could have kept that piece of land, and we didn't. So they have a choice. You can say yes, and we will be very appreciative, or you can say no, and we will remember.
So there he is stating what he wants. So we've given you this. We've done this for you. This is what we want in return. And why do we want it? Because we want to defend the American people. And he indicates that Canada would be a beneficiary of that defense because, you see, missiles would come from, say, he never says China or Russia, but it's clear that's who he has in mind, that ICBMs would come, over, the North Pole. They would come over Greenland, any attack on the United States. And he's saying we need it because it is the future site of a world war, and we need to occupy it ahead of time, and we need it in order to create the so-called Golden Dome, a protective shield for the United States. So again, that related back to the American people. So Ukraine, saving the American taxpayer, saving American lives. NATO, saving the American taxpayer. Once again, Greenland, saving the American from potential bombing, nuclear strikes from an adversary. So all of this related back to the American citizen. And I got to say, I found that extremely refreshing. Now, Trump, I don't know if he was using a teleprompter or not. My guess is there might have been, bullet points. He definitely wasn't reading off of a teleprompter. He may have just been using it. Sometimes I'll do that in the way I'm doing in this episode here. I don't have a teleprompter, but I have my phone here with just a few notes that serve as prompts just to remind me. Typically, when I'm speaking publicly, I do that as well, unless it's a very sophisticated presentation where every word is important. I prefer it to be a little more off the cuff and conversational. And Trump does too, at his rallies. Now, in this case, some of his critics did justly say that he rambled and he went on too long. That probably is true. But if you were to edit out some of those rabbit holes that he went down and just put it nice and tight together. I thought it was a fantastic speech. Now, Glenn Beck called it, the greatest speech by any American president ever, something to that effect. I'm not prepared to go there. I mean, the Gettysburg Address was pretty important, and there's been many others that were quite significant as well. Washington's farewell address is just yet another example. That said, it was a very important speech and a very timely speech given where the world is. And Trump pulled no punches. But pulling punches doesn't make you a jerk or being quote unquote fiery, as some headline I read said. He wasn't that. He was just very plain speaking. I'm not going to beat around the bush about it. We've given you trillions, and we've got nothing in return. Well, the bill's coming due now, and we want Greenland, and we don't want to lease it. That's what we want. And then he said, I nearly fell over on the floor when he said this right here.
Without us, right now, you'd all be speaking German and a little Japanese, perhaps.
That was a slap in the face to European leaders, and one they richly deserved. The attitude of Europe these days towards the United States is that we're an ATM. And we have no right to offer any opinions on everything. We just simply have an obligation to keep sending money. Keep your opinions to yourself. Keep any policy adjustments to yourself. Send money. Oh, and by the way, when we need them, we need you to send American boys who are willing to die. Now, my life, in some sense, was shaped by that expectation of Europeans and by the fact that our government kind of went along with that. And I say that because, my father, who served in the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions, in addition to being an airborne ranger, was stationed in Germany. Why was he there? Was he there to defend, the United States? Well, no, he was there in this case to defend Germany in the case of a war that the Russians might launch across the Berlin Wall and invade. And the United States, American boys, many of you listening to this, probably your families were shaped by that as well, because your father served over there, or maybe your mother did, or maybe you did, and you can relate to that. Meaning, Americans have given more than just money. They've given American lives there. And Trump is simply reminding them of a hard truth that they do need to remember this. You exist because we made it so. And when we do make requests of you, we don't want to see a lot of hand-wringing. We don't want to hear a lot of excuses. And then he said this, which I thought was very important, about NATO as it relates to the United States.
But the problem with NATO is that we'll be there for them 100%. But I'm not sure that they'd be there for us. If we gave them the call, gentlemen, we are being attacked. We're under attack by such and such a nation. I know them all very well. I'm not sure that they'd be there. I know we'd be there for them. I don't know that they'd be there for us. So with all of the money we expend, with all of the blood, sweat, and tears, I don't know that they'd be there for us.
Now, after his speech, you saw a lot of quote unquote fact checks, that said, well, no, they did. They did help us right after 9/11 by providing us with intelligence. Okay. I don't think that's what Trump was talking about. I think Trump was saying that if we found ourselves in a hot war with Russia or China, would the French, would the Germans, would the British send their sons and their daughters to die on behalf of the United States as we have done on behalf of Western Europe? And I think the answer to that, as Trump implies, is no. I don't think they would do that at all. I don't think there's any chance that they would do that. And Trump is speaking a truth that anybody with any sense knows is factually correct. And that comes back again. This is part of his bargaining. Trump is fundamentally a businessman. You cannot forget that about Donald Trump. And he was there to wheel and deal. Here's my leverage, NATO. And he was making it clear to them that if you want our help in any future conflict with Russia or anyone else, then you'd better make this happen. Otherwise, as he put it, we'll remember. That's what he was getting at there. He wasn't saying we're going to attack you. He was saying when you call on us and need something, we may help you, we may not, unless we get what we want in this particular instance. So Trump loomed over this World Economic Forum not just because he came there and he spoke. And by the way, a lot of people will say in the comments, well, he's just one of them. He's just a globalist. Look at him. He's over there speaking to them. Ladies and gentlemen, I have spoken to loads of atheist groups, and I'm not an atheist. I've spoken to Muslims. I'm not a Muslim. I'm hostile to both of those worldviews. I have spoken on CNN. I've spoken on Al Jazeera. I've been on MSNBC, of all places. If I could be any place I wanted to be, I would be speaking to leftists and Muslims every day of the week. And that's because those are the kind of people I want to get in front of. I want to have the opportunity to change their minds, to shape the way they think. In writing, I have published for The Atlantic. I have published for CNN. I've published for as far left as I could possibly go. The Apostle Paul, Jesus, the other apostles, they spoke to groups that often, they spoke to groups that were often hostile to them. It didn't make them one of them. So people who come into the comments and say this, it's a silly comment because it's not accurate. And we want to get in front of these kind of people. I got a call, it's been a few years ago now, but I got a call from a producer with NPR who asked me if I would be willing to be the token conservative. You know, they occasionally have token conservative. I've played that role for CNN, for others from time to time. Would I be willing to be a regular on a show like All Things Considered as kind of the token conservative? And I said, yes, I would relish it. And I mean it. I would relish that opportunity. I would love to get a chance to go at it in a thoughtful way against people on the other side because I want to convince them. But as I said to him, there's zero chance that your bosses are going to let you choose me. There's zero chance. They don't want me. They don't want a real conservative. They want somebody who's, like a pro-abortion, pro-open borders, quote unquote, conservative. They want a Juan Williams type. They don't want me. They want a Bill Kristol who's not an authentic conservative. That's what they want. And again, I never got the call and I never heard anything about it ever again. But if I had that opportunity, I would definitely do it. And so for Trump to come and speak at the World Economic Forum doesn't make him one of them. It's a fabulous opportunity to get in front of, in one place, 50, 60 heads of state, 600 plus CEOs of major corporations, and loads of other very influential people when it comes to shaping global governance. That's why Donald Trump went. And you see, unlike the UN, the World Economic Forum includes lots of corporate types. In fact, you could say it's mostly, corporate types. Those are the people Trump wants to speak to. He wants to influence them. He wants to cut deals with them. So I was very glad that he was there. But make no mistake about it, they hate him. They hate him. He opposes their government, he opposes their agenda. They know it. And that's because he makes no secret of the fact. Donald Trump he carries a big stick, and he, unlike Teddy Roosevelt, he does not walk softly. So they know what he's about. And that's, by the way, that's one of the things I like about Trump. I don't agree with absolutely everything Trump wants to do. I think his plan for Gaza is completely unworkable. But I like the fact, as with all my friends, I like the fact that Donald Trump says what he thinks. There's nothing more frustrating for me than people I talk to who will lead you to believe that they agree with you when they actually don't, and then you leave their presence and go to act on something thinking you have their support, only to discover you never did. That to me is frustrating. I prefer for people to, I don't mean be rude, be an ass, I just mean people who state what they actually think. And Donald Trump is nothing if not genuine. He's very straightforward about what he thinks. So they know that, and they're not big fans of him for that particular reason. A second takeaway from this World Economic Forum was the absence of Klaus Schwab. Now, bear in mind that Schwab, a German engineer, he's not Swiss, he's a German engineer, at least not he's Swiss citizen now, but German born of German descent. Klaus Schwab is the founder in 1971 and sole chairman of the World Economic Forum until last year when they got rid of him. And the way they got rid of him, I covered that in a previous episode of Ideas Have Consequences, but they did it by ginning up a lot of petty allegations, against him, a hostile workplace environment. I mean, you get anybody on that. You go out and find employees or former employees who are be happy to trash you or trash their bosses. And that's what happened here. And it was a way of saying, you need to move along, or we're gonna find something else on you and try to stick it to you. Schwab got the message and he resigned, but he did so very reluctantly and very unhappily. I think we'll still hear more of Schwab. His story in this isn't over until he dies, or at least he loses his mental capacity to defend himself. But I wondered if going to this World Economic Forum, after he had been head of it for 55 years, he had been the ringmaster all that time. This had been his brainchild. Would it feel really different? Would there be a lot of whispering about Schwab in dark corridors and over lunchroom tables? I heard none. I mean, it's kind of alarming how quickly you can be forgotten. It's funny, I've told my boys several times, not just talking about globalist scumbags, but I've told my boys, be careful that you don't make your careers idols, because if you think that that's going to be your legacy, when you're gone, you're gone. And the people who come in and take your office, they don't long remember you. Steve Jobs is very much in the past, as big a figure as he was, and one day Elon Musk will be too. And Schwab, 55 years in this position, gone, forgotten by and large. And there was very little talk about, there was no talk about him actually that I heard, or that I didn't bring up myself. And secondly, I wondered if there would be, some kind of ideological shift. So since he's out, would there be some kind of difference that, hey, we've really wanted to address this kind of issue, but, old man Schwab wouldn't let us do it? Nope, none. And so what that tells me is, with no ideological shift, that the reason they got rid of Schwab wasn't, as I have said for months, ideologically driven. They got rid of him because they found him an embarrassment. The Bond villain, kind of look to the man, looked like Donald Pleasance or Telly Savalas as a Blofeld in old James Bond movies, and that was complemented, or augmented, I should say, not much of a compliment, by a thick German accent. We will build the future, this kind of thing. And I think they found him embarrassing. And so they wanted a different look to the World Economic Forum. And supposedly, this is actually very funny, supposedly They wanted a face for the World Economic Forum that was more representative of the common man. So they went and got two very common men. They got Larry Fink, CEO of BlackRock and manager of 12 trillion. Yes, you heard me correctly. That's T as in tango. 12 trillion in assets. And Andre Hoffman, CEO of Roche Holdings, the largest family-owned pharmaceutical company in the world. They got those two guys as co-chairmen. And that's because they're so representative of common people. And because, I mean, what's more popular with people in the world right now than pharmaceutical companies? I mean, the appointment of those two guys proves that the World Economic Forum is incredibly out of touch, incredibly tone deaf. And you may say, well, we've always known that, Larry. Yes, you have, because I tell you that and because you can observe it. But you would still think that with all their money that they would have hired better, marketing consultants who would tell them the hard truth. Look, guys, the front you want for this organization, maybe Fink and Hoffman and guys like them control things behind the scene, but that's not who you want out front and on stage and whose pictures you want on the website stating that they're the chairman of the organization. But that's what they did. And I find that quite fascinating given the fact that there was no ideological shift. And as I say, Schwab is out. The next thing I would tell you that's an interesting takeaway from me from this World Economic Forum is the fact that we're all just guinea pigs to them. We are all just guinea pigs to them. You have to think of the world. I've told you that the World Economic Forum is an HOA from hell. And if you're not from the United States, you may not know what that means. That's a homeowners association. Homeowners associations, most Americans hate them. They're private entities of little martinets who tell you what color you can paint your house and how you have to recycle and so on. But for our purposes in this moment, think of the World Economic Forum as an ideological laboratory. It's an ideological laboratory where people sit and they devise schemes to, quote unquote, change the world, like the World Economic Forum's motto says. And those ideas then go out and are tested on the guinea pigs. Us, all of us. It was incredible to me that Fink, in a roundtable discussion, admitted this.
I could argue in the developed countries, the big winners are countries that have shrinking populations. Okay, that's something that most people never talked about. We always used to think shrinking population is a cause for negative growth. But in my conversations with the leadership of these large developed countries that have xenophobic immigration policies, they don't allow anybody to come in, shrinking shrinking demographics, these countries will rapidly develop robotics and AI and technology. And if the promise, I didn't say it's going to happen, but if the promise of all that transforms productivity, which most of us think it will, we'll be able to elevate the standard of living of countries and the standard of living of individuals, even with shrinking populations. And so the paradigm of negative population growth is going to be changing. And the social problems that one will have in substituting humans for machines is going to be far easier in those countries that have declining populations.
Now, that's a pretty remarkable statement right there. There he is admitting casually, almost like a throwaway remark, that open borders, that experiment that he helped devise along with other people in the WEF ideological laboratory and set loose on the guinea pigs all over the world, billions of people all over the world. And then he's kind of like, you know what, it didn't work. And guess what? Only those countries that didn't participate in the experiment are properly positioned for future success. I find it astonishing that he says that. That should have been the centerpiece of his introductory remarks, the opening ceremony of the World Economic Forum, and it should have been stated on his knees, begging forgiveness of the entire Western world. These people are guilty of crimes against humanity. You think I'm defending Klaus Schwab when I say that they ginned up accusations against him? They did. All those things they came up with were false and ridiculous, petty at best, improper use of an ATM. But it isn't because I think Schwab isn't guilty. He's guilty of crimes against humanity. Let's get him for that. But you see, they're not bothered by that. The WEF elitists, not elites, elitists aren't bothered by any of that. They endorse all of that. And here they are saying, you know what? Turns out open borders, that doesn't seem to work very well at all. I mean, look at Minneapolis. Okay. That's almost like a bakery saying, you know, guess what? It turned out the kelp muffin isn't very popular after all, and maybe we should remove it from the menu. It's just that trivial to him. It's that trivial to them. Because for them, it's entirely theory, it's entirely experimentation to which they themselves are not subjected. We are. Isn't that incredible? Imagine the arrogance that it takes to think like that. And by the way, do I think Larry Fink is a Satanist and these kind of thing that people sometimes drop in the comments? No. I think Larry Fink is a guy who sees himself as a decent human being. And most people who know him probably do think that of him. Husband, father, good provider for sure. Hasn't actually ever killed anybody. But you see, this is what I call bureaucratic evil. It's casual evil. It's where you just devise plans that affect other people and you don't care. You don't care how it affects them. So that statement to me kind of embodies the spirit of the WEF. It's just indifference. Elie Wiesel, the Auschwitz survivor and author, winner of a Nobel Prize for Literature, I believe, he wrote a little book called Night. N-I-G-H-T. Night. And in it, he says this: the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. Now, we could argue whether or not you agree with that remark. My wife does argue with it. She doesn't agree with that remark. But that's beside the point for my purposes here. What Wiesel was getting at, because he'd had a lot of time to think about it in a place like Auschwitz, was he had been subjected to a kind of casual evil, not the evil. He wasn't here in this case speaking of the active evil of, say, guards who sick their dogs on you or beat you with butts of rifles, or exterminators who push you into a gas chamber or into an oven. He wasn't talking about those kind of people. He was talking about people like Adolf Eichmann, who just made their trains run on time to places like Auschwitz and Mauthausen and Buchenwald and Ravensbrück and Sachsenhausen and Dachau and on and on and on. People who never actually shot or killed anybody, who seemed to be nice, regular people, and were just very efficient at moving the whole machinery along. And that's the kind of people we're talking about here. That's the kind of people that Hannah Arendt was talking about in her book, Eichmann in Jerusalem, a report on the banality of evil. That's what Elie Wiesel was talking about. The opposite of love is not hate, he says. It's indifference, meaning you just don't, they don't even enter into your thinking. At least to hate someone, you have to care, they have to enter into your mind in some kind of way. But indifference, you sit in a roundtable discussion at the World Economic Forum and you just kind of casually say, you know what, maybe that didn't work. Oh well. Oh well. So this, boy, the concert's really getting cranked up out there. You might be hearing that. Artificial intelligence. I had with me on this particular trip Jenica Pounds, otherwise known as Data Republican, and Data Interpreter. Her interpreter, they were along on the trip. Jenica has come to my home. We've hosted her, and I'm appreciative of her work, and she was interested in seeing other aspects of my work, which is kind of the field work. So there's one end of the spectrum, which is the ideological end, and then the other end, which we work out on this show consistently, seeing how this affects the people downstream. So she was interested in seeing that, and I suggested World Economic Forum, you need to go with me. So she did. An observation that she made that I thought was a very good one, and given her technical computer background, is one that you would expect her to make. And that was the observation that artificial intelligence was being mentioned everywhere. The main street through Davos is called Promenade. And all along the Promenade, there were references to artificial intelligence. Now, this didn't immediately jump out to me because that's just business as usual at the World Economic Forum. Every WEF that I've ever attended, they are absolutely enamored of, infatuated with artificial intelligence. And the reason for that is because, first of all, they just get orgasmic, thinking of technology. They just any kind of technology, new technology appeals to them. But their fascination with and their love for artificial intelligence is really for a rather maniacal reason. And that is because of the hope that it offers them for further controlling people and turning them into controlled commodities. And that's because leftists never think of individuals, they never think of humanity as anything other than a faceless mass. They think of humanity as the mere brick and mortar for the building of the utopian state. And a way for you to understand the difference and to identify, by the way, leftist, which is usually utopian totalitarian thinking. And every utopia, from Thomas More's, even Plato's Republic, straight on through, they are all ruled. We tend to think of utopia as we go like, how are you doing? Oh, this is a utopia. This is wonderful. I love this. Utopias aren't paradise. Utopias, at least classically speaking, utopias are leftist paradises ruled by leftist elitists who are self-appointed, who think it is their right, in Plato's terminology, philosopher kings, who have the right to rule. Why? Because they're the ones who can see that what everyone else is looking at are shadows on the wall in the cave. Only they themselves have gone out into the light of day to see the reality. That's how they think of themselves. Go and read Plato's Republic. Or excuse me. Yes, by all means, go and read it if you want to, and I'm guessing most of you won't. But you can go and read the Allegory of the Cave, which is actually quite short. Go and read it, and you'll get an idea for how they see themselves. Well, artificial intelligence, for them, has great appeal because of its ability to control the faceless masses for whom they care not at all. It's why, in our little reading group, we did Ex Tenebris, Out of Darkness. That's a little book that you can read, order it online. You probably find the PDF of it online, written by Russell Kirk, Ex Tenebris, Tenebris, Out of Darkness. And you get an idea for leftist thinking there. in one of the central characters, who's the head of a planning commission, basically the head of an HOA. It is the way they think. And you see, artificial intelligence offers ability to control people right down to the most minutest details of their life. You have the ability of first mass surveillance, things like facial recognition and voice recognition. Some of you will know, I don't think I mentioned this on this show, but after I was swatted, after what happened in Cairo and some of my adventures, I realized that I was putting undue pressure on my wife because she feels that I don't place enough value on my life. It's kind of a personal conversation, but she feels like she values my life more than I value my life, and that I'm a little willy-nilly in the way I risk it. Now, I argue that that's not true. I don't do any base jumping or cliff jumping or cave diving or anything like that, not anymore. But her point is well taken, and I thought, you know what? There's been a series of dramatic events in my life and a couple of attempts on my life. I need to chill just a bit, dial it back for a while. So I stayed home for the spring, summer, and into the fall, thinking and planning, but also building for my mother, who's had a stroke. I've mentioned that here. She can't live independently, but she can live independently enough that, she doesn't just have to be in a bedroom. So we built a little cottage for her. And the cottage is, right on my property. But to keep an eye on her in case she falls, I was looking for a good monitor, something like a baby monitor, so that you could occasionally look to see that she's okay. And if she called out, we would hear her. So I put this out on to people, what do you recommend? And these cameras that are produced by Wyze, W-Y-Z-E, were recommended to me. So I went and bought them. They were $39. You get two of them. And unboxed them, started setting them up. And in the process of setting them up, because they work on Wi-Fi rather than just simply, a radio signal, line of sight, you had to go through all of these permissions. You agree to this, you agree to this, you agree to this. Well, I don't do that. I read privacy policies. Most people don't, but I do. I'm just nerdy enough that I do. And I started reading their privacy policy, and I found it alarming. It said that they could collect basically anything they want. That they would collect, get this, facial recognition, voice recognition, location, and all the other information that is involved there. But and then reading further into it, it indicates that they have the right to listen to conversations. Now I want you to think about that for a second. That's astonishing stuff. So I started drilling down into Wyze cameras, W-Y-Z-E. Well, there are allegations that they're owned by the Chinese, which have been denied because there's a company set up in Seattle. They say, see, we're owned in Seattle. But then I find other information that says, yeah, but that company was set up by the Chinese to give it an American storefront. What the truth of that actually isn't clear to me, but it does seem pretty obvious that they were sharing information with the Chinese on anybody who used these cameras. Meaning the reason these cameras were $39 is because they want you to have them and they make their money on the back end. So they made them a very, it's kind of like a printer, except printers don't want this information from you. But in the early days when you'd go to buy an inkjet printer, the printer itself might be $59.99, but then you realized too late that when you needed another cartridge of ink, that would be $200. They were getting you on the backside. So you would buy what you thought was a very reasonably priced printer only to discover to keep using it, you had to spend a lot of money, every couple of months. This is the way artificial intelligence, the way they want to use it. They want to use artificial intelligence to control you. Voice recognition, face recognition, collect data, see where you are, monitor every move you make, how you use your phone, when you use your phone, who you're talking to, all of that stuff. And this is why I say to you that being on social media, you need to be very, very careful. And you do, because what you put on social media will be weaponized against you should it ever be deemed by a government to do so. And the previous administration in this country, the United States, not this country, I'm in Poland, but the previous administration had every intentions to do that, and indeed they were doing it. They just hadn't yet the sophistication to get there. But you see, artificial intelligence offers them that. So the WEF is absolutely enamored of this. Now, Jenica, that is Data Republican, an observation that she made that I think is a very good one is that she sensed at this World Economic Forum that the WEF is sensing that artificial intelligence is developing at a rate that's so rapid that even they can't keep up with it, and that they're afraid of it. That part is probably true, because they can't keep up with it. And it's because it's not taking place in a, just in a black site that's owned by Google. It's taking place all over the world in many different countries, some of which, like China, have closed doors. So these are the things that are going on that are quite fascinating. A final note here in this episode of Ideas Have Consequences is that those who follow my work, particularly my work at the World Economic Forum, are used to me gate crashing, getting into places where I don't belong at the WEF. This year I wasn't able to do that, and the reason I wasn't able to do that is because I was mainly playing, kind of tour guide for Data Republican and Data Interpreter. And I was happy to do that, by the way. I don't say that in any kind of resentful way. I just simply say that by way of explanation. If you are expecting me to have, some great story of a president or a prime minister or a corporate head that I was able to corner and ask some questions of, I didn't really get that opportunity to do that this year because I wanted to see to them and really kind of give them an orientation. That said, having additional eyes there, particularly eyes and ears that have a different educational background, different kind of training than my own, was useful because there are things that jumped out to the two of them that didn't necessarily jump out to me, or there are things that I'm focused on that they're not necessarily focused on. Say nothing of the fact that, I took them into the one of the cafeterias where people are attending the WEF are sitting all over the place. And I said, here's what I want you to do. Here's the key to the WEF. Go and sit down and start having conversations with people. Most of the people who are going to be there are so arrogant and can't wait to tell you how important they all are that they almost never ask you who you are. I think it was asked one time this year, and maybe once in the previous 3 years, who I was when I was asking questions. Because they want to tell you about themselves and why they're important. So they never get around to saying, so what do you do? I've been asked my name and I give my name, and that's usually as far as it goes. But rarely, and again, only twice have I been asked, well, what do you do for a living? And that's because I was really drilling down into something. And I have an honest, if somewhat deceptive answer to that. I had a nonprofit. People immediately, their eyes begin to immediately glaze over when you say you had a nonprofit. It sounds so boring, so bland, so uninteresting that the questions stop right there. If I say I'm a writer, I'm an author, the questions are just start ramping up, from that moment. So both of those are true statements. But which one I use and in what circumstance matters. And at the World Economic Forum, the point isn't to get into a meeting with Donald Trump or with Ursula von der Leyen or something like that. You watch that online. 70% of the World Economic Forum's presentations are online. So there's no point in me going for that. The point is to go and get the mood, the ethos, to meet the kind of people who attend there. And while the guys at Rebel News, Ezra Levant, those guys do a great job. Theirs is what I call ambush journalism. They're waiting with their cameras and with their mics outside of the auditoriums for when heads of states and heads of corporation come out. And then they run alongside of them with the camera and such, asking them questions. It's genius. They really do a great job with that. But that's not what I do, because that gets a different kind of answer to questions than the one I want. The ones I want are answers to questions when you think, I'm just another WEFer. And people speak more freely, they speak more openly. And that makes for something very, very interesting indeed. So that was this year's World Economic Forum. I'll still be processing this for a while. And as I say, I'm going to be abroad for a while. This was, by that I don't mean a woman, I just mean overseas for a while. Little joke, it was funny, you can laugh. This is just the first of several countries that I will hit on this particular expedition. But all of it relates back to the World Economic Forum. Doesn't matter where I'm going, it all relates back to Davos, to the World Economic Forum, or places like it, where ideas, crackpot ideas, are formed and sent down to affect the lives of millions and even billions of people. And I intend to expose that to you. So stay tuned. Here, you can also find me over on X, where I'm posting video and some other things related to this. This has been another episode of Ideas Have Consequences with me, Larry Alex Taunton from Poland.